the story of how Rebbi Shimon Bar Yochai was born. The story goes that his father Yochai and his mother, I believe his mother's name was Sarah, they couldn't have children for over 10 years. And the Shulchan Aruch writes that a couple who can't have children for over 10 years, they have to get a divorce. Nowadays, we use different seirufim to say that maybe they'll continue, maybe they'll be able to, scientifically, this and that. But mi'ikar din, technically from the Shulchan Aruch, a person should get divorced. So the 10th year was coming up, and obviously they were a very holy couple. They did not want to get divorced, but there is a mitzvah for the father, for Yochai, to have children. And if he can't have it through this woman, even though he loves her very much, he must get remarried. There's a mitzvah upon him to get remarried and to have children. So the 10th year is coming up, and the friends of Yochai start talking amongst themselves how they think they should try to convince Yochai to try to get divorced. Unfortunately, who was right behind them listening to the whole conversation? Sarah, Rebbi Shimon Bar Yochai's mother. So she hears this and she starts bawling, crying. She starts crying all night long. And she doesn't know what to do with herself. She grabs Tehillim. She says she does it. She's literally pouring out her heart to Hashem that Bezrat Hashem, something will happen. That before the 10th year, that her husband Yochai won't have any thought to have this divorce. So a few days go by, and Yochai has a dream. Yochai has a dream that he's in a super big forest, and in the forest there's a lot of beautiful trees, and he's standing right next to a dead tree. Dead, bare, dead, no leaves, barely high at all. Everything else in the forest is beautiful, colorful, growing at a very high length. And he thinks to himself, why am I here, and what am I doing next to such a dead tree? So all of a sudden he sees in the distance someone coming into the forest, and he's carrying around a pail. So he starts watering all the trees. And when he starts watering the trees, every tree becomes even more beautiful than it was before. So he's thinking to himself, I want to see what he's going to do with this tree. This tree's dead. So he comes to the tree. Finally, he takes a cup, something out of his pocket, and he starts pouring. Puts off the lid and starts pouring around the trunk of the tree. And he says, "Why is this tree?" Yochai says, "Why is this tree dead?" He doesn't answer. He says, "Please tell me, why is this tree dead?" All of a sudden, as soon as he saw him pouring the water around the tree grew, and it was the most beautiful tree in the whole forest times 20. So he said to himself, he woke up and he said, "I don't know what this is." He tells his wife the whole dream, and she said, "Halom tov, halom shalom." I'm just kidding. So she said, "That's a good point. What is this dream?" She says, "Do you have an idea what this dream is?" She says, "I think I know what this dream is." She says, "It probably is, that means that Hashem's giving us a child." So he says, "I also think so." So they said to themselves, "I'm going to go," it was before Pesach, "I'm going to go to Rabbi Akiva. He's the Gadol Hador. Let him poter my dream." So finally they get to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva sees Yochai, and he greets him, and he says, "Bruchim habayim, welcome." Sits him down, he tells him the whole dream. And he says, "Nu, what do you think the dream means?" So he says, "I think the dream is Hashem's going to give me and Sarah a child." So he says, "That's exactly what it means." So he says, "But I don't get it. Why was I near the dead tree and everything else was? Why did this tree go to be 20 times the height of every other tree?" He says, "What do you think?" He says, "Because he's going to be a big tzaddik." He says, "Not only is he going to be a big tzaddik, he's going to be one of the biggest tzaddikim that ever lived." And he says, "I have one last question. What's that little flask? That's the word. What's that flask that he took out? The gardener took out of his pocket and poured it around that dead tree?" He says, "That was your wife's tears, that she was crying for your future child, and bischut those tears that she cried that night, you're going to have one of the biggest tzaddikim." So one, we see from this story a tremendous thing. One, that there's no yeush, no giving up. When Hashem wants a person to have a child, B'shat Hashem, we have to do our ishtadlut, or anything in life, we have to do our ishtadlut, and Hashem has rachamim from Shemaim. Two, you see the power of a woman's tefillot. Anyone who cries, the Gemara says, even though some gates of Shemaim are closed, with tears, and a person cries out and pours his heart out to Hashem, nothing is closed. Everything gets opened up. You have the key to everything. B'schut everything he taught us in his holy teaching of the Zohar, and also in the Gemara. He's not just a Kabbalist. He was a halachist. He was truly one of the biggest tzaddikim. The Rebbe says, the Zohar says that he was a Gilgul of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're not talking about a Pashut tzaddik. Says that his gematria is 516, which is the same Gemara as Rabbi Nachman ben Feged, but for the Torah that I'm going to say, 515 tefillot Rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu prayed to get into Eretz Yisrael. 515. But he didn't get to. That 516th prayer, Hashem stopped him. 516 is the gematria of Rebbi Shimon Bar Yochai. 516 is the completion of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why we're happy on Lag BaOmer and not happy specifically with a Yom of Tsar, Yom of Tshuva, Yom of calculation of your deeds on Moshe Rabbeinu's Yortzai. Why don't we do a barbecue on Moshe Rabbeinu's Yortzai? Specifically we don't, because it's not completion. When was Am Yisrael happy? When we have completion. Rebbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the tikkun for Moshe Rabbeinu. Chazak u'baruch.